Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. We are starting our monthly set of videos to do with the 6 weekly grocery hauls. So in September, I went and did groceries last Friday, and it is already Thursday. And I have been doing all the things that I need to do with all the food over the past week, and then recording it to get it to the point where I can do notes so that I can do a voiceover for the stuff that I've done. So when I first started doing YouTube, I wasn't sure exactly where the channel was going to go, but the main path that the channel has followed is the sharing of how I use the food that I buy when I buy it so far in between. So we shop every 6 weeks approximately, though there will be some 4-week shopping trips in the lead up to Christmas, just to make sure that we get the timing right for Christmas, and trying to avoid school holidays as much as possible, because I don't like to shop when there's other people's children everywhere. You know, I have enough children of my own. I don't need to deal with other people's children too. And so I shop about every 6 weeks, and when I started sharing the grocery hauls and things like that, because everyone loves to see a grocery haul, there was all the questions about how I make the food last and what we do with the food and all that sort of thing. So what we try and do is mostly a single ingredient shop. Mostly, I'm not, super successful at all of it, and we still buy some crap in amongst all our stuff. But what we try and buy is limit the quantity of different types of things that I buy, and buy larger quantities of those single ingredients. So I bake all our bread, so I buy large quantities of flour, but I don't have to buy store-bought bread other than hot dog buns, which I buy on the day of shopping for dinner that night. So I bake all our bread. Otherwise, we do a lot of flatbreads, a lot of loaves, a lot of focaccias, bagels, English muffins, all that sort of thing. There's other things like I buy like tinned tomatoes, tinned corn, and things like that, and I make them into pasta sauces and that. So I don't tend to buy jarred pasta sauces or that kind of thing, because I stick to buying those single ingredients as much as possible and using them to make everything else. And that way, when I want something, I have all these different single ingredients that I can make those things with. The other thing is that we buy fruit and veg in bulk, and that means that by the end of the 6 weeks, we don't have a lot of fresh fruit and veg. Cabbages will last the 6 weeks if we store them correctly. Sometimes we get 6 weeks out of citrus or apples and things like that too, again, if they're stored correctly. But most of the veggies, we've got baby spinach and we've got broccoli and cauliflower. Unless I blanch and freeze them, they aren't going to last. So we tend to use them heavily in the beginning of the month, and then we use frozen veggies later on in the month. And then a lot of the fruit that doesn't last that long, or we've got tomatoes or sometimes apples, it depends on the quality of the apples and things like that. We do things with them at the beginning of the month that is going to last us throughout the end of the month as well, and beyond that, because when I'm doing a batch of canning, I tend to do a large batch, because that way it's going to sit on the shelf for a series of time. So that's the little bit of a spiel about what we're doing. So I used to do daily videos once I did the grocery haul, but it all was a little bit too much work, especially coming into spring and summer and garden season and things like that. So what I have been doing is I record everything I do. Now, I don't talk while I'm recording it because there's just too much going on. The kids have music playing, and I do schoolwork supervision while I'm doing it, as well as many other things. So all I do is I point the camera at the bench and the stove, and then I come back, I watch it all through, and I write myself some notes, and I come back and I do a voiceover for what I'm going to share. So now we're doing it every couple of days. I try and get a video out about every second day, but I don't always succeed. So I'll do my best as I can and share a couple of days at a time in a video. It means the videos are a bit longer, which is pros and cons. Some people like them longer, some people don't, but it's just what's working for me at this point in time. So this is the first lot of food prep, planning, freezing, preserving, and that sort of thing that happened in the first couple of days post the September 6-week grocery haul. So this month I tried something new. I bought a bunch of the barbecue or rotisserie chickens from Costco. It's not something that I've ever bought before because I was concerned about transport of them. But this month I didn't buy as much meat. I didn't buy a case of the beef trim or a case of the pork. So I had a whole esky that I could use, and that seemed a safe option for me to stick all the hot chickens into an esky on its own to transport home, and they were still within good temperature range by the time we got home. We have high quality eskies. They're those ones that, you know, keep things frozen for 7 days and stuff like that. So I decided to give it a go this month. Now, the chickens they're not seasoned at all. There's no salt or brining or flavouring at all. Like, I'm used to getting barbecue chooks from Coles or Woolworths where the skin's really salty and tasty, and the meat has obviously been brined, and so it's tasty as well. The chickens from Costco are very bland. They're just shredded. They're just cooked chickens with nothing on them. And they're cooked in a gas oven, which means that some of the colouring of the meat ends up kind of pinkish and dark, which some people really dislike. I don't have a problem with that. We cook on gas all the time, so we come across that all the time. But the chicken definitely was somewhat bland. Not that this is an issue, because the whole point of buying pre-cooked shredded chicken is to use it in dishes. You don't generally eat it just straight anyway. But it was surprising, and that's, for anyone who hasn't bought them before, that's just to let you know. So what I did was I shredded all the meat from the carcasses to be used, and then I froze the carcasses, which will be used to make stock and dog food. And I'm going to put all the carcasses aside for the moment. We bought 8 chickens. I'll probably do 2 or 3 lots of stock out of these throughout the month, and I will can the excess stock, or I will plan a meal around having the stock. Like if I'm making lasagna soup or something, I generally need 3 or 4 litres of stock and things like that. So it depends on how I'm going to do that. But they'll go in the freezer at the moment to be used for the stock. I ended up doing 3 chickens this morning because I had other stuff to do. It's definitely easier to shred these chickens when they're warm, but obviously I wasn't going to be doing that on the night I got home from shopping, so it is what it is. Once I stripped one of the chickens, I did weigh the meat just out of curiosity because I'm trying to figure out the costings and all that sort of thing. So I got just under 1 kilo of chicken from one carcass. So at $6.99 a kilo, that's $6.99 for a chicken. That's a really good deal, because that ended up being $6.99 for a kilo of cooked chicken, plus I have the carcass. If I'm buying chicken frames, I can pay $2 a frame through the butcher, and that's not even cooked. So, and carcasses, when you make stock, it's always nicer to roast your carcasses before you make the stock. It makes lots of extra good flavour. The little bits of excess fat and skin and stuff that are left on these rotisserie chickens is going to make that stock really rich and tasty. So these are a great thing for that. So by doing it this way, I pay $10.39 for raw chicken breasts and $11.39 for raw chicken thighs. So it's $6.99 for a kilo of mixed meat. That's a really good deal. Obviously, as I said, it's a little bit bland, but it's plenty moist and things like that. So it's still perfect to use in a lot of ways. It's not really how we normally eat chicken, but as I said, it's definitely worthwhile doing. So once I shredded the chicken, I used the Thermomix to shred it. Now, I did experiment a little because I've only ever used it on warm chicken before, like just freshly cooked chicken and then shredding it. And so this was cold, and being a rotisserie chicken, the fibers of the breast tissue and stuff is quite hard, quite strong. So I tried what you do normally with the warm chicken, which is on reverse for about 4 or 5 seconds. It didn't work real well. It left a lot of chunks and some bits a bit too small. I actually found that I needed to break the chicken up a bit, so break those fibers a little bit before I stuck it in the Thermomix. And then it actually worked best on forward, not reverse for this. So on forward, it sort of diced it, which is fine. If I had a specific use for the chicken and I wanted it in those long shreds, then I'd cut it by hand, I think. But for this purpose, just getting it nice and shredded up to be stored was fine. So it kind of diced it by doing it that way, but it worked quite well. And it was definitely quicker than standing there and cutting it, and, a lot easier on my hands to do that as well. Once I had a few of the chooks done and had gotten started, we had lunch. So I had leftover hot dog rolls from dinner the night before. So every shopping trip, anyone who's watched one before, the dinner that we do for the night of the shopping trip on the Friday night when I get home is hot dogs. Darryl does them for us for dinner. It cooks up some onion and bacon and the sausages and the hot dog buns, and we just have that with mustard and ketchup for dinner. So I had leftover hot dog buns because they come in a pack of 24. We actually get to the point where there's not quite enough for lunch the next day, as the kids are eating more of a night time. So I may end up buying 2 lots of them next month, and some of them can go in the freezer if need be. They're not my favourite bread, but they are very handy to use for a lot of different things. And on those first few days when I come back from shopping, I don't necessarily get bread made because there's just too much else going on. Made a fresh batch of the duck egg mayo, the same as I always do. It's got egg yolks, lemon juice, mustard, cowboy candy, salt, and olive oil. We blend it using the immersion blender and slowly adding the oil, blending it through until it's the consistency we want. And we just had mayo on roast chicken rolls. It was quite nice, actually, very reminiscent of like old style Red Rooster rolls, which we haven't had in many years. Though again, the chicken was not seasoned like a Red Rooster chicken normally has quite a lot of seasoning, and this wasn't seasoned at all, but it's still tasty enough with the mayo and everything else. I just added a bit of salt to mine because that's what I like the flavour of. After that, I got started on some of the strawberries. When we'd packed them away, as much as possible, there was a crate that didn't fit in the fridge. So I knew that I needed to at least get through that crate today because it had been sitting on top of the fridge and I didn't want it to attract fruit flies or the bush rats or anything else. So I wanted to get through that. The strawberries some had a bit of green on them still, so they were pretty good for a few days. Like, it wasn't like sometimes when I buy trays of cheap strawberries, I have to bring them home, rinse them in vinegar straight away that night because otherwise it's going to send them all moldy because they're just that like that. But these ones were $2 a kilo, which isn't like excessively cheap, but still pretty cheap. And so therefore they were pretty good quality. I did them in batches, emptying some punnets into a colander, washing them, and then chopping them. I cut the tops off, and I wasn't really worried about the excess coming away from the strawberries because I'm going to use these tops for something else. So I just used a knife, cut the tops off, and halved the strawberries into a bowl. And I just got through them all, batch by batch by batch, filling these bowls until I got them all done so that this first batch was done. Powered through and got it done. I filled a baking tray with some of the pieces to begin with and stuck them straight in the freezer. These can be used for smoothies, or the kids even like to just eat them straight from the freezer, frozen, as a snack. So I'll put them on the trays. After about 24 hours, they'll be frozen solid, and I'll bag them up to go back into the freezer, into the chest freezer. The more you spread them out, the less likely they are to stick together, but I was working on limited space, so I filled the tray as much as possible because I can only fit the one tray in the freezer for flash freezing at the moment. Our freezers are pretty full, so I did what I could and fit as many as I could onto that tray for that. With the tops of all of the strawberries that I'd gotten through, I decided to put them in the steam juicer. So there's a lot of fruit left on the tops, but I only did that first crate of the strawberries, so I barely had half the steam juicer full with just the tops. So what I did was sort of make a mixed fruit cup style of juice out of it. I added apples. These green apples were actually from last month's shopping trip, so they're a bit sad looking, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're just a little bit wrinkled. So I cut them up. There was some mandarins that weren't the freshest ones, so I used some of them as well. I didn't core the apples or anything. I did peel the mandarins, though I probably could have got away with not peeling them. They were very thin-skinned, but I was a little concerned about adding a little bit of bitterness to this juice, so I decided not to. I did decide to peel them, though I think in this case it probably would have been fine. Breaking them up helps to get more, like the smaller you make it, the more efficient the steam juicer is too, I find. So taking the skins off them, I think, would give them more efficiency for going through. So I stuck them all, filled up the top of the steam canner and put it on. I fill the bottom level with water and then stick it on the stove as you do with the steam juicer. After it had steamed for a while and I got about 1.5 litres of juice out of it, I decided to give the fruit a bit of a mash. Now, if you want a really clear juice with no pulp or bits of any sort of fruit in it, you need to not move the fruit around in the top of the steam juicer. You need to completely leave it alone. I don't have a problem with a little bit of fruit matter in it, and I can always strain it again later, but if you want a really clear juice, do not move the fruit around in the top of the steam juicer. But it doesn't worry me, as I said. So I gave it a bit of a mash with the potato masher. I then poured the juice back through the top again. So this is optional also, but I find that sometimes I get a bit more juice by doing that. By pouring the juice through the top, giving it a stir, I get a little bit more of that liquid out of the fruit and the top, and it just works quite well for me. You can, of course, pour some water through as well. It's just going to dilute your juice. It depends what you're using the juice for. But I find that pouring the juice back through works. That hot juice going back through all that fruit, giving it a bit of a stir, and letting it sit for another 15-20 minutes, and it gives us everything that I need to get out of there. And it did give me a little bit more because I ended up with about 2 litres of the juice. It was a lovely pink colour. I forgot to show it, but you can see it in the back of the next shot on the bench cooling down. So I got around about 2 litres of this fruit cup juice, and it was a really pretty sort of a strawberry colour. For dinner that night, rice paper rolls had been requested. They'd actually been requested before I did the grocery shopping, and I just didn't have the fresh ingredients for it. So whilst I had all that rotisserie chicken that I had just stripped, I thought it would be a good one to have. I sliced up cucumbers and carrots into thin pieces. I probably should have just grated them, to be honest, but I didn't think about it. So I sliced them all up into thin sticks. I put rice vermicelli noodles into my thermoserver, breaking them up as I went so that we could get some shorter pieces, covered it with boiling water for a couple of minutes. I mixed up some satay-esque dipping sauce. So I just do a coconut cream, peanut butter, fish sauce, a little bit of red curry paste, a little bit of ketchup mayonnaise, some soy sauce, a bit of sugar and salt, and put it on the stove to simmer and thicken up. I think I ended up adding more red curry paste to this one at some point because I used a whole tin of coconut cream because I didn't want to put a part of a tin in the fridge. So as I make it, I just taste it as it's thickening up and getting a little bit more condensed. I'd taste it and see if I need to add anything else to it. Simmer it for as long as it takes for the fats to emulsify and for it to be at a good dipping texture, because you want to be able to dip your rice paper rolls into it. So, the texture is personal preference there, but I like it nice and thick. And I actually like to dip the first bit in, take a bite off my rice paper roll, and then spoon a little bit in the top of the rice paper roll. So, I drained and rinsed the rice noodles so that they weren't as hot, and drizzled a little sesame oil over them and spread it out to stop them sticking to each other. So by rinsing them, you're going to get rid of some of the starch and cool them down. It's going to stop them sticking as badly, but a little bit of sesame oil in them as well will help them to keep separated, and I love the flavour of sesame oil, so that works well for me. I added a little bit of mayo to the shredded chicken as well, and then just started putting them together. Some noodles, the chicken, carrot, cucumber, really plain, and they were pretty boring to look at, to be honest, because I didn't have any herbs or anything to put them in. So there's no bright summery colours, like normally if you had some mint or something, you could lay it over the top and you get that colour. And the chicken was unmarinated because it was the shredded chicken, which means that it didn't have the colour of being cooked on it either, or the seasoning. So it was all a little bit white, but they were super tasty, and the child who requested them was happy. I really do need to get to a point where they can sort of make their own, but we've gotten sort of there with sushi, which is a little bit more simple. The rice paper rolls, the issue is that you have to get the rice paper wet enough to be able to fold, but not so wet that it stretches out and tears. But if you don't get it wet enough, then it cracks. So that's the challenge here with teaching them to do that. So I just made everyone theirs just as they wanted them, made them a couple, and then if they wanted more, made them more until they'd had enough, and then Darryl and I made some and ate them as well. Alright, so the next day I dealt with the juice that I had made the day before. I didn't manage to get to it on that same day, so this is the next day. So I put the juice in the fridge and then got it sorted today. So what I did was I poured it into a pot, very slightly straining any large chunks out, and measured how many cups that I ended up with. The rule of thumb for a lot of cordials and that sort of thing is 1 cup of sugar to 1 cup of juice. We find this a little bit of an overkill, and I generally do about half of that to 3/4, depending on what fruit I'm using and stuff too, because some fruit's sweeter than others. So I put the juice in, and then I put about half the amount of cordial. We have been proven wrong in some senses of cordial where I've tried to reduce the sugar and they really haven't kept the bright flavour once added to soda water. They need that bit of sugar to keep that. Things like lemon-based ones, the lemon ginger ones and the lemon ones, I generally end up with 1-to-1 on that because they just don't hold their flavour without it. You add it to the soda water and it ends up being bitter without any of the sweetness of the fruit. It's a weird concept. But for things like berries and stuff like that, they're already pretty sweet. So we find the half is plenty. It depends on the thickness of the juice and stuff too, to a degree. So you do have to do it to your flavour profile, but the rule of thumb is generally 1-to-1. Reduce it as you needed. Sometimes you can taste it and realise that it's not going to be quite enough. Sometimes I bottle it and then I realise that this one's a little bit mild, but we just drink it a little bit mild. It tastes a little bit like mineral water then instead. So I put about half the amount of sugar to juice in the pot. I also added a few cubes of my frozen lemon juice because I like the brightness that citrus adds to just about everything. And that was lemon juice that I had frozen in ice cube trays when I got a couple of boxes of lemons when they were in season. I also added some citric acid and tartaric acid. This helps keep its colour. It's also preservatives. The tartaric acid can help stop any potential fermentation. I'm going to process this anyway, so it doesn't really matter, but I like to do it for everything I make. I just put it in and then I know that it's got it in there and it should be fine on the shelf. It should be fine for a week in the fridge once it's open, things like that. So I just prefer to add it to it. Once the sugar is all nicely dissolved and it had come up to a simmer, I filled my bottles. I like to use these Mutti Passata bottles. They're pretty to look at, and I like this brand of Passata as well, so, you know, two birds and all that. I buy the Passata and then I like to reuse the bottles. I have new lids as well as reused lids. It just depends on what they look like as to whether I'm going to reuse them. I toss out ones that I don't like the look of, keep the ones that I think are fine, and I have new ones in a container as well. I got nearly 4 jars out of it, which isn't too bad considering I was using mostly excess amounts and just the tops off the strawberries and things like that. The one that wasn't full went into the fridge to use over the next few days. I cleaned the rims with vinegar, cleaned the lids as well, put them on nice and firm, ready to be processed. I wasn't going to run the canner for just those 3 jars, so I moved on to the next thing that I was going to get done, and I'll do something else that can go into the canner as well at the same time. I made up a quick lunch next. Cut up some broccoli really nice and fine, threw it in my pan, added some of the shredded chicken because I still had that there, some caramelized onion jam, tin of corn, salt and pepper, and mixed it all evenly through. You can add anything you want in here. Sometimes I saute off silver beet or kale if I've got it in the garden. Zucchini works well here. Any sort of vegetable you want works in this, and I just filled the pan with it. Then we whisk up 12 eggs with a tin of coconut cream. Normally I would use a Thermomix, but I didn't have any clean bowls, so I think it was Apollo and I who did this one, whisked it all up together, and then pour it all over the vegetables and chicken in the bottom. Now, I did forget to grease this pan or add any oil to the egg mix. I didn't realize that until I got it out of the oven, and you'll see why. So it's going to stick a bit, but that's fine. I stuck it in the hooded barbecue to cook. It normally takes about 30 minutes, about 180, until the middle is set and ready to be eaten. If you use the Thermomix to blend the eggs and the coconut cream, you get lots of lovely air in the egg mix and it ends up really light and fluffy. So if you're going to do it by hand, just make sure it's blended really well. But even if it's not, it just ends up a bit of a more dense quiche type structure. If it gets whisked up really nice and light, you've got lots of air and bubbles into that dish. While that was cooking, seeing as I had just had chicken out on the bench anyway, I started shredding a few more of the chooks. I'm pretty sure I got through all the rest of the 5 here. So I just kept on shredding and putting it in bowls and putting the carcasses in the freezer to get through them all. They were taking up a lot of room in the fridge. I didn't have a Thermomix bowl clean at the time to shred it, so I just stuck it as is into the bowls, and I'll deal with it later. I just wanted to get them out of the fridge. Those containers that the chickens were in take up a lot of space in the fridge, but I didn't want to transfer them into something else and dirty something else when I had to get them dealt with within the first couple of days anyway. So once I got those out of there, it left me more room in the fridge for other things, which I was grateful for. This is what the frittata looked like when it was cooked, and you can see my error in forgetting to grease the dish. But that's fine. I just put a bit of water in it when we were done and let it soak, and it wipes away fairly easily. That's the beauty of ceramic lined cast iron, that little bit of water and a soft scourer and it will all come off. Frittatas are something we normally have a lot of over the summer months when I have stuff fresh from the garden. Cherry tomatoes on the top is really nice. It's a great way to use eggs and to make a quick filling breakfast. We regularly serve it with a dollop of the duck egg mayo on top as well. And some of the seasoned salt is nice. The mushroom salt or the smoked citrus and rosemary salt is really nice sprinkled over the top as well. I quite often make 2 of them, and then there's leftovers to snack on throughout the day, afternoon tea and all that sort of thing as well. I then got started on something else to add to the canner. I decided to make a batch of strawberry jam. So I use low methyl ester pectin in most of my jams. I buy it from Green Living Australia. It's the Pomona's pectin style. Like, it's not Pomona's brand, it's Green Living Australia brand, but it's the same as the Pomona's pectin that you get a lot of and see a lot of in American canning videos. So I use it in most of my jams and other similar canning products with the calcium water and with limited sugar. We already use a lot of sugar, especially at the moment when I'm canning up half a dozen things within a few days. We go through many kilos of sugar, and I have to remind myself that these things that I'm putting on the shelf are going to be eaten over a long span of time. It's not all going to be eaten at the same time, but it still makes me feel better to use a little bit less where I can. So I pureed up 8 cups of strawberries using the Thermomix. It takes it to a really nice, smooth puree if you want it, or if you don't want it to go that smooth, you can just leave it a little bit chunkier, for like I did for the jam. A little bit of texture in a jam is always nice if you're using a fruit-based jam to non-jelly. Obviously, if it was jelly, it would be juiced or strained or whatever. This is a jam, it's going to have texture, and I like it to be that little bit chunkier rather than fully smooth for a jam. If I was making a sauce, so if I was using half the quantity of the Pomona's low methyl ester pectin, you can make it into like a syrupy sauce, and then I would have taken it to really smooth. But this way, for jam, I like it with that little bit of chunk to it. I put it on the stove and added the calcium water to it, brought it up to a boil. So you want to bring it up to a boil before adding your sweetener. You want to mix through your pectin into the sweetener. So I used raw sugar, blended it well. I'm using 2 cups of sugar to the 8 cups of pureed strawberries here. Again, a lot of jams are 1-to-1, so by using the low methyl ester pectin, you can reduce your sugar quite considerably. I think the smallest amount here would have been 1 cup. I used the 2, so I mixed the pectin powder through the sugar, brought the strawberries up to a boil, and added the pectin and sugar mix, and then you want to stir it really vigorously until all the sugar and pectin has dissolved. And bring it back up to a boil. So you're going to keep on stirring and stirring and stirring until it comes back up to a rolling boil, and then you can turn the temperature off, and then that way the pectin is dispersed through the jam well, and so is the sugar. It's all dissolved and it's ready to go. So once it's brought back up to the boil, turn the heat off, and then we're going to put it through into the jars. I really like wide mouth jars for jams. I find them much easier for the kids to make sure they're not leaving jam behind unnecessarily. I did find some of my old mason jars on the back of a shelf. I didn't realise these ones were discontinued and had to go looking for the size of them for canning times and things like that. But they appear to be a squat pint. And I used one of the Aldi jam jars as well. I filled them using the new gadget that a friend had bought for me by ladling into the filler and then filling the jars with that. By doing that, you can keep the rims of the jars a lot cleaner, which is kind of important when you're doing something like a jam, because jam can get really sticky around the rims of the jars, and then you can have issues with the seal. So by using this, it allowed me to put it in the middle of the jar. Like a funnel works as well to a degree, but you're ladling across with a funnel across other jars, generally speaking. So using this is a little bit cleaner. However, it does only hold around about the same amount as what's in a jar when they're talking pint jars. So I don't know how much work this saved me realistically, but it is kind of nifty to use it regardless. So I filled the jars up. So I did all the normal, cleaned the rims well with white vinegar, wide mouth ball mason lids that I had stashed somewhere. I didn't even realize I had any ball mason brand lids left. This is the last of them though. I really do need to order some more lids, so I'll probably order the Fajars lids because they're the ones that I've been using lately. But I tend to just lean towards using my lug lid jars and the Fowler's Ricola jars, and I tend to use my ball jars with storage lids and things like that because the lids are just so hard to come by. So lids on the jars, rings fingertip tight, and then the lug lid firmly onto the jam jar as well. I used my pressure canner as a steam canner. I can't use my steam canner with the passata jars because they're too tall. They will not fit into the steam canner, but I don't like to use water bath canning for the passata jars either because that's a lot of water to cover that height of jar. So what I did was I used my pressure canner as a steam canner. I put 4 litres of water in the bottom. This is a Buffalo canner. It is 35 litres, and therefore I use about 4 litres in the bottom because it's so wide based. I put the rack in there, warmed the water up a bit because the jars are warm to hot depending on which we're looking at. Like the Cordial was back to warm, but the jam was quite hot. So you want the temperature of the water in the canner to be similar to the temperature in the jar so that you don't have any thermal shock. I put all the jars in there and turned it on. I started a timer once the pressure valve popped up. So you want the canner to be spurting steam until the point where the pressure valve pops up, and that means that you can then start a timer and you are at the same as if the steam canner was on the line that it needed to be for steam canning. So once the valve popped up, I set the timer for 15 minutes. Now, excuse the dirty lid of my canner. I say this all the time because I don't submerge the lid completely and we only have a fairly small sink. The inside's really nice and clean, but the outside never really looks clean. But anyway, so 15 minutes processing time. Then I turned the burner off, waited for the valve to drop before cracking the lid, and then removed the jars onto a wooden board to sit for 24 hours, as we do with any jar, because that resting period is important for the jars to be able to finish the process of sealing. For dinner, ramen was requested. we need to get through the veggies that we have that don't store well, and I don't have the freezer space to blanch and freeze at the moment, so it's a good meal to make. I just threw this one together, no real recipe as such. I'm actually out of miso and I forgot to get any, so I will order some with my bulk food order, but I keep putting the bulk food order off because of funds and stuff. A friend posted on Facebook a recipe for a ramen that used a green curry paste, so I decided to integrate that in this as well. So I cooked some garlic and ginger off in some oil, added the green curry paste, threw the broccoli in, added some coconut cream, some chicken stock that I had on the shelf, some peanut butter and fish sauce, and let it simmer until the broccoli was al dente, and then threw a bunch of the shredded chicken in as well. Once it was done, we served it over the ramen noodles in bowls. I think I added some soy sauce and some salt into this as well. I just tasted it as I went and flavoured as such. We used the Jin Mai Leng ramen noodles that we always use, a 1 kilo pack of those and just boiled them in a pot for 4 minutes, and then put them in the bowls and then put the ramen over the top. At this point in the month, I tend to miss filming the actual serving of the meals a lot. Some of that is because I cook it and prep it and then I walk away and someone else serves it. And some of it is just because there's more people in the kitchen than there should be. The benches are full of canned goods as well as everything else, and it's too hard to have the camera. Because my camera sits on a tripod in my kitchen and the kitchen doesn't have a whole lot of space, if there's people in the kitchen along with me and they're dodging the camera, then I tend to just put the tripod out of the way rather than risk it being toppled over and broken, because if my camera broke, I'd be stuffed. So throughout these few videos in the beginning of the month, I quite often don't have a nice, clean, served up, pretty bowl to share with you. Sometimes I go to the effort of taking a photo and then I'll put the photo in, but a lot of the time it doesn't work. So that was the first couple of days of the September grocery haul, food prep, planning, meals, and all that sort of thing. So I hope you enjoyed watching, perhaps drew some inspiration from bits and pieces that were there, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.